Hey everyone! Today we're talking about one of the most well-known stories in history, the birth of Jesus. It's a story that has been passed down for generations, celebrated every year during Christmas, and recorded in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. But did you know these two versions of the story are actually quite different? Matthew focuses on the star in the sky and the visit of the wise men, while Luke tells us about the angels appearing to shepherds in the fields, and Jesus being born in a humble stable. Both accounts give us unique insights into the significance of Jesus' birth, but they also leave us with many questions and points to reflect on. These differences have sparked debates for centuries, but for Christians, both versions are important because they help build the bigger picture of who Jesus was and what his purpose was. Interestingly, the earliest gospel, Mark, doesn't even mention the birth of Jesus. It skips right to his adult life, when he began his ministry in Nazareth, teaching in synagogues and surprising people with his wisdom and authority. This raises questions about whether the Nativity story was later added to highlight Jesus' divine origins, or to connect his life more closely to prophecies from the Hebrew Scriptures. The idea of Jesus being the Messiah had roots in ancient prophecies from Israel. Prophets had predicted that a Savior would come from the lineage of King David, someone who would bring God's kingdom to earth. But as time passed and the kingdom didn't appear, stories about Jesus' birth became a way to reaffirm his identity as the chosen one. Both Matthew and Luke tied Jesus to these prophecies to make sure people understood his divine significance. By doing this, they emphasized his role as both a spiritual leader and a fulfillment of God's promise to humanity. One of the big questions about Jesus' story is why he's often linked to Bethlehem when he was called Jesus of Nazareth. The prophet Micah had mentioned Bethlehem as the birthplace of a ruler, so Matthew and Luke included Bethlehem in their accounts to connect Jesus to that prophecy. Matthew even starts his gospel with a family tree that traces Jesus' lineage back to Abraham and King David, emphasizing his royal heritage. Luke does the same, but he flips the order, starting with Jesus and tracing back to Adam, showing his connection to all of humanity. This dual emphasis, Jesus as a king and as a universal savior, reflects the broader message of Christianity, which aims to reach all people, regardless of status or background. In ancient times, it was common to tell stories about miraculous births to emphasize the greatness of a person. For example, there were tales of Roman emperors being born from gods, and Matthew and Luke use similar themes to highlight Jesus' divine origin. Matthew compares Jesus to Moses, portraying him as a new kind of leader who would bring spiritual freedom. Just like Moses, Jesus' story is filled with dreams and angelic messages. In Matthew's version, Joseph, Jesus' earthly father, learns about Mary's pregnancy through a dream where an angel reassures him that the child is from God. These dreams play a key role in guiding Joseph's decisions, showing God's active involvement in protecting and guiding Jesus' early life. Joseph was initially troubled because he and Mary weren't fully married yet, only engaged. In those days, engagements were legally binding, so breaking it off required a formal divorce. Joseph planned to separate quietly to avoid shaming Mary, but after the angel's message, he changed his mind and accepted Mary and the baby. Matthew even ties this back to another prophecy, saying the baby would be called Emmanuel, meaning, God is with us. This name reinforces the belief that Jesus' arrival signified God's presence among humanity, bringing hope and salvation. The idea of Mary being a virgin has caused a lot of discussion over the years. The original Hebrew text used the word for young woman, but when it was translated into Greek, it became virgin, which led to the belief in Mary's virginity. In ancient times, calling someone a virgin often symbolized purity rather than a literal description. This interpretation highlights Mary's moral and spiritual purity, making her a fitting figure to bring the Son of God into the world. Matthew also introduces the Magi, or wise men, who saw a special star and followed it to find Jesus. These Magi were astrologers from the East, and their visit symbolized that Jesus was recognized even by outsiders as someone important. they brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, items fit for a king. Gold symbolized Jesus' kingship, frankincense represented his priestly role, and myrrh hinted at his future suffering and death. But their visit also set off alarm bells for King Herod, who felt threatened by the idea of a new king of the Jews. Herod, known for his cruelty, reportedly ordered the killing of all baby boys in Bethlehem to eliminate any potential rivals. While there's no historical record of this event, it fits Herod's reputation, as he was notorious for killing his own family members to protect his throne. In Matthew's account, Joseph was warned in another dream to flee to Egypt with Mary and Jesus until it was safe to return. Eventually they settled in Nazareth, fulfilling another prophecy that Jesus would be called a Nazarene. This flight to Egypt echoes the story of Moses and reinforces the idea of Jesus as a deliverer. Luke's version of the Nativity story is quite different. Instead of wise men and a star, it features angels announcing Jesus' birth to shepherds. Shepherds were considered lowly in society, so their inclusion highlights Jesus' role as a savior for everyone, especially the poor and marginalized. Luke describes Mary and Joseph traveling to Bethlehem because of a Roman census, which required them to register in Joseph's ancestral town. With no proper lodging available, Mary gave birth in a place where animals were kept, and Jesus was laid in a manger, a feeding trough. This humble setting emphasized Jesus' connection to ordinary people and his mission to serve rather than rule. Luke's account has sparked debates too, especially about the census. Historical records don't confirm a worldwide census during that time, and the timing of Quirinius being governor of Syria doesn't quite match. Still, Luke's focus is less on historical accuracy and more on showing Jesus as a humble servant and a savior for all people. His emphasis on humility and compassion resonates with themes that continue to define Christianity today. In the end, both Matthew and Luke paint different but complementary pictures of Jesus' birth. Matthew emphasizes Jesus as a king and fulfillment of prophecy, while Luke highlights his humility and connection to ordinary people. These stories were so influential that by the time Christianity became more widespread, celebrating Jesus' birth became a major holiday. Although Easter was originally more important, Christmas grew in popularity, especially after Emperor Constantine made it an official celebration in the 4th century. Over time, Christmas traditions blended with local customs, evolving into the celebrations we know today. So whether you see Jesus as a king, a servant, or both, his nativity story continues to inspire people around the world.